Hello, everyone. Welcome to our plenary session entitled Changing Environment. I'm Dr. Renzo Ginto from the Philippines. I'm speaking right here from Manila, and I'm just very excited about this conversation. We have three distinguished panelists from different parts of the world, from different agencies and organizations, and together the four of us will be contemplating about the changing environment. What are these changes that we're seeing now in the natural environment, the changes that our planet is currently facing, experiencing. What are the challenges, and how do we move forward? What are the solutions? What are the opportunities? And so today, again, as I've said, we have three panelists, and our first one is Dr. Musonda Mumba, who is the chief of the Terrestrial Ecosystems Unit of UN Environment. We also have Honor Rule, who is the general manager of the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, and Antonella Riso, who is the international climate, technical, and research manager of Healthcare Without Harm. So to all three of you, welcome to this conversation. And, we have, participants from both Canada and around the world tuning in. And so I would like to encourage our participants to ask questions and even feel free to give some comments using the chat box. And we will try to, or I will try to inject them into the conversation as we proceed. So yeah, let's begin. And changing environment. It's a broad topic. The conference that we're having now is really about, climate change and health, the intersection between the two. But I wonder from where you are standing or sitting now, because we're all in Zoom, I wonder, what do you think are the major changes that, we're facing now in terms of the environment? What is a changing environment to you? Again, based on your background and your experiences and the organizations that you represent. So maybe we can start with Musonda.
Thank you very much, Renzo, and to the organizers of the conference. I'm really honored to be here. And I work for the United Nations Environment Program based here in Nairobi. Perhaps I should begin with a story and a reflection based on my moderation last year at the United Nations Climate Conference in Madrid. On the 11th of December, I happened to interview and moderate a panel with the Secretary General of the United Nations, together with the Minister of Science and Innovation of Spain, Mr. Duque. But I think my most interesting and exciting interview was because Luca Pamitano from the European Space Agency was streaming in live from space. And for me, what got me is how he described our planet away from home. And perhaps what we should also remember, in the same month in December, we had fires in Australia. We also had fires in the Amazon, we had fires in the Congo, and we had peatland fires in Siberia. If that is in no way telling of the changes that have happened to planet and Mother Earth, I don't know what is. Because we began to see these dynamics and these shifts, and that was just December 2019. And very quickly, in the heels of that climate change discussion, by January, a little bit as if, rumors of war, rumors of something, we hear there's a virus here, there's a virus there. And before we knew it, within 2 months, the whole planet was locked down. And what is very telling of our current circumstances is that intersectionality between a pandemic and climate change, and also the intersectionality of environment and health, because we have found ourselves in a way that we can no longer dissect nor talk about these issues in a very siloed approach. We're now talking about good food systems, healthy food systems, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about that later. But for me, the changing environment is what we've seen over the last decade. And now as we enter this final and last decade of the Sustainable Development Goals, how do we then reflect about what is it that we do about this changing environment? And that for me is a bigger question now more than ever, because in essence, we don't have time. We have to do something now, in all levels and facets of our lives, wherever we are on the planet, wherever we are, whichever part of the world and continent, whatever social strata we're coming. So for me, I think what is important to keep in mind as we talk about the subject today is how the environment has really been the giver of life and also the taker of life. In a sense, you know, when we've not treated it well, people died from these forest fires as a result of climate change, but also they died from health-related issues because of inhaling or the, you know, the pollution and all of that. What we've seen with California very recently and Canada having to have the implications and the impact of fires from California all the way to Vancouver. I was speaking to a colleague the other day who was just half the time coughing. And what's even more poignant is that these dynamics are no respecter of political boundaries. So how then do we think about the solutions, and how then do we think about the actions that we need? And also coming from the United Nations, in closing, I must say, as a multilateral organization, this is now the 75th year of the existence of the United Nations. 24th of October is going to be the UN Day. What does that actually mean in terms of going forward and having a broader conversation collectively as humanity? So I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and perhaps I can leave it there, Renzo.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sonda, for for laying out some of the pressing challenges that our environment, Mother Earth is currently facing. And I really like your emphasis a while ago on about time. The urgency that we have now in terms of addressing these challenges, and for acknowledging as well the time where we're in right now. Of course, we have the pandemic, and then the UN is celebrating its 75th anniversary. Maybe later we can talk about the future of global governance, and how can we create a global governance system that does not just address health crises such as COVID-19, but also is a good steward of the only planet where we live in, and that we the only planet that we have. Ono, how about from your part of the world, from the seat where you are seated now? How do you see the changing environment? What are the challenges as well as the opportunities?
Well, I'm currently sitting in Geneva, and we just had a doubling of COVID cases compared to yesterday, and then a doubling the day before. So I got a bit of a strange perspective, but that's not what I want to speak about. So first of all, it's great to be part of this panel, and it's great to be part of the conference. And first, I thought I'm going to talk about my 7 years in New Delhi, because I actually left New Delhi because of a changing environment, namely air pollution, which made it impossible for my little daughter to live there. But I also went to join a new agency of the Aga Khan Development Network, the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, and I have the honor to be its first general manager. And this agency, in essence, works with the people of the Karakoram, Himalaya, and Pamir Mountains to help them be safe in the face of a changing environment that makes them increasingly unsafe. And it's an important message, because there's various aspects. Everybody knows, well, maybe a few don't, but almost everybody knows and accepts climate change is happening. Many people still think it's somehow somewhat happening in the future, and we need to focus on stopping it. But if you live in the Pamir Mountains in Tajikistan, you don't think it's in the future. It's actually yesterday that it happened, and people are trying to survive today with the increasing risk that is the consequence of climate change. Because people talk a lot about climate change mitigation. It's obviously a very important topic. They talk less about climate change adaptation, partly because people think it can't be done. Now, this is a crucial issue, because people also talk a lot about saving the planet. Well, actually, the planet is very safe. The only question is whether humans on the planet will continue to exist. Even the animals are safe. Some of them will die, but animals will continue to live. The question we face as a consequence of a changing environment is the future of humans on the planet. Now, people talk a lot when they talk about climate change, about the North Pole, the South Pole, and the ice and what happens. The third largest ice field in the world is actually right on top of the mountains I mentioned, the Himalayas, the Pamirs, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush. And some people have referred to that as the third pole. There's a big difference. The third pole is the direct top of the water tower, the watershed that feeds 1.5 billion to 2 billion people in Asia through its water. On the third pole, there are snow leopards, just like there are polar bears on the North Pole and emperor penguins on the South Pole. But there are actually people living right with those snow leopards. They're right there on what I call the front line of climate change. They live right under the glaciers that are at risk of falling apart. They face the increasing avalanches, mudslides, rock slides that threatens the house in which they've lived for generations. They always knew which hills were dangerous, which mountain slopes were dangerous, but they've never seen the frequency and the violence that they see today. Now, the agency I have the honor of leading was created by His Highness Yaga Khan in recognition of this risk, saying, A, we need better solutions than the future, and therefore we combined the skills of different parts of the development network. And B, we need to change our perspective. We can't just help these people try and survive. It's not good enough. We actually need to be more ambitious and say we need to plan for how people in that type of a situation can actually create a habitat where they can thrive, not just survive. Because here's the problem. Many people think, high mountains, marginal, people will just move out. They'll go to Karachi, they'll go to Dushanbe, they'll go to Kabul, wherever they might go. They might even go further afield. The problem is that if, as humans, we start giving up on good habitat where we've lived for generations in balance with nature, we face a real issue, which is where are we all going to live? We can't just all create the equivalents of Karachi, Bombay, and cities like that and concentrate everybody in, again, coastal cities with great density. It is not a model for habitat. We certainly need to rewild the earth, but we need to be saving crucial habitat for humans on the planet, because the battle taking place in those high mountains will take place everywhere in the world in the next 50 years. And we need to learn how to work with communities to adapt, find a balance with nature, and do well even in this new, risky, dangerous, changing environment.
Thank you so much, Ono, and a lot of wisdom from what you just said. Your starting statements. In a way, you're saying that even if we talk about the environment at the very core, it's still very anthropocentric in view. And in mission and in purpose. How are we going to actually survive in these changing times? Because the environment or the planet will indeed survive in whatever shape or form. But it's us that, or maybe it's not sure. And that's why, maybe you've heard of this new term, planetary health, which is a reaction to public health that brings together the health of people and the health of the planet. Another term that I heard that is somehow interpreted as synonymous to planetary health is civilizational health. So, how can actually humanity survive all these changes, which, by the way, are also anthropogenic in origin. So a while ago, I used anthropocentric, but actually a lot of the environmental challenges that we face, from climate change to biodiversity loss to, air pollution that you cannot endure in Delhi, as you've said a while ago, these are all human-induced due to many of our activities. And so anthropocentric in purpose, but anthropogenic in terms of, the origin and the evolution of these problems. Now I want to bring in Antonella, because her organization is actually doing a lot in terms of not just, and Anna mentioned this dichotomy between adaptation and mitigation. I think Antonella's organization, Healthcare Without Harm, which I had a privilege to be, working for and to until now working with, has been at the heart of both mitigation and adaptation within the health sector. So Antonella, from Healthcare Without Harm's perspective and from your perspective, what is a changing environment? What are the changes? And how can the health sector be part of that positive change needed?
Thanks. And well, I live in Argentina, in Patagonia. And right now, in this changing environment, this such a special year, we have been like reviewing like everything that we were doing. So, but in a sense that we want to be more impactful, that we want to be effective, and we know we have a crisis. And we are part of several coalitions that don't necessarily work with health. But this year made it like obvious for everyone that without a healthy environment, there's no way of having healthy people. So that case became evident to everyone, so that we need to work on that. And that's a crisis that we cannot solve only from the healthcare sector. Like, the drivers of climate change are everywhere. So the need of these broader coalitions on an understanding where we have like the pieces that we need to change. And in the public, this happened in the public too. Right now, my country and others in this region, like Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay, are having months of fires. And that's a conduct that some like ranchers have to turn on fire. But right now, what happens is that drought, it's so long that what people need to understand is that the system has changed, that the environment has changed. So it can't cope with that. Sometimes before, maybe they would start a fire and that wasn't that hard to turn off or to control. And right now that is completely out of control. And we have thousands and thousands of acres burned and fires completely out of control because the environment has changed. And that has created people breathing smoke for months in cities that never lived that before. And that's interesting because we are now having problems with air pollution in cities that never lived that before. And that's interesting in my country because you suddenly speak about air pollution in places that's a changing environment. You never worried about the air quality because that was there and it was safe. And suddenly for months, now it's not. And so I think that changing environment is like we have a lot to do to communicate and to bring all the science to the public. So, and to public officers and people making decisions and developing plans so they can understand the links and how we need to work together hard to prevent this from happening again and to reduce the damage because climate change is already here. So the environment has already changed. We are discussing like the size of it and how serious it's going to be and how safe your own town is going to be in the future. So I think we have a great challenge and we have seen some opportunities here in Underworld too, because healthcare systems that were already working in environmental management were working really hard in the response to COVID, just not to make it even worse. So we are seeing that in the network, people that already knows all this, and they say we cannot create new problems in the COVID response. So they were working hard not to overuse plastics and things like that. So I think, of course, we are quite aware here that we have a tremendous challenge on our hands. And at the same time, we are seeing, I am seeing some lights really like ahead. So, but yeah, it's a changing environment, like in many, many ways.
Thank you so much, Antonella. And thanks also for bringing us to Patagonia. It's just amazing. You know, we're all from different parts of the world. We are sharing about the different manifestations of, you know, the changing environment. But one thing is constant. The environment is changing, you know, in many different ways, whether it's, cities that are filled with, you know, a cocktail of noxious gases because of, you know, burning of fossil fuels and urbanization, to, you know, the melting of ice, to the destruction of forests. So many phases of the changing environment, but we all, but all happening in a common home. And Antonella, you mentioned a bit about the the health sector's role in addressing the challenges, although you also admitted that even within the health sector, we cannot do it alone. We can, we really need to work with other sectors, and that's why we have the likes of Musonda and Ono in this panel. We need to form the, the coalitions that will really, tackle these grand challenges facing the changing environment. But you also mentioned that right now, and I'll bring this discussion to, the COVID-19 pandemic. Healthcare has been, overburdened, and there's a lot of stress. But also there's a lot of utilization. For example, you mentioned a bit a while ago a bit about plastic. We've been seeing pictures in social media of single-use masks floating in in the sea or in the river or along the beach. And so are we actually learning these lessons? Now that we're in the COVID moment, we acknowledge there's an immediate challenge or crisis that we need to address, which is the pandemic. But we also have longer term challenges, slowly, gradually, or maybe even quickly evolving in the backdrop. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, etc. How can we take advantage of the COVID moment to actually not just beat COVID, but to transform the environment that is changing and transform it for the better? Anyone who would like to start? And by the way, I would like to encourage the participants to please keep on putting your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section of the Zoom platform. Ono, I saw your hand. You can start.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good question. I didn't in my introduction come to the issue of COVID, but it's important to endorse what one of the panelists, boss Inger Anderson, said, which is this is a signal from the planet that there's something is not right. There's an imbalance, and Inger is a friend of mine from the World Bank. What she says always makes sense to me. It is important to realize that this issue about is it the planet or is it the people, we're getting a clear signal that whatever it is, we need to think about it. Now, one really interesting issue about the COVID crisis is in the beginning, everybody thought this is a health crisis. We got to figure out how to test, how to trace, how to treat, develop a vaccine, manage the hospitals, etc., etc. And very quickly, we realized that all this is true, but it's also a logistics challenge. It's because everybody closed the borders. The question is, how do you keep feeding yourself if you're in a developing country? It's a poverty challenge. It's a job challenge. It's a disaster preparedness challenge, because the same mechanisms we use to respond to an avalanche can be very useful to help a community prepare for how they need to behave in COVID. It's an all-encompassing challenge. And I think since this is a health event, and I think it's absolutely great that in a health event you invite non-health people like Musonda and me, because it shows that you yourselves have thought about it. It's really important to understand that the health sector itself needs to work in a bigger system, needs to realize also that as a sector, it may have primacy in terms of keeping people healthy, but it has tremendous impact. We are measuring our greenhouse gases as the Aga Khan Development Network. And one of the big contributors to greenhouse gases in our network are generators for hospitals and anesthetic gases. You wouldn't think of them. Obviously, we're not saying no electricity for hospitals or no anesthetics for operating patients, but the sector itself needs to work on what it can contribute and how it can contribute to lessening the problem, and maybe thinking about how to provide healthcare in a different way. I don't know how, but it's the same challenge we throw. We tell the car people no more gas, right? So we can tell the health sector, figure out how to do the same thing, but do it more efficiently. Maybe not this year, because this year they're kind of a little bit busy. But I think it's important to realize that. But the main thing for me is that COVID has told us that we need to look at everything at the systems level and not at the sectoral level. And I think if we do that, we can work magic, because we've always seen in disaster response that in the response phase, people do their best work because everybody works together. It's when they start rebuilding that their ideologies pop up, that people have their preferences, they want to design it in a certain way, work with this, that, or the other thing. Communities are no longer as together. So we need to actually use this emergency to develop a new way of working, just like Zoom.
Thank you so much, Ono. And you know, in health, there's room for everybody, and that's why you are here and Ms. Sonda is here. I think COVID-19 is also reminding us that every professional is a health professional. It's not just we people in healthcare, such as myself, trained physician. And I think now we're also realizing that health is everybody's second business, right? So you can be working in the environment sector like Vasonda, but really underlying it or what underneath it is really a commitment to healthy people. And then you also mentioned about, you know, what are, you know, for instance, of course, you called for a systems approach to addressing these problems, but also at the end of the day, a good way to start or a good place to start is within your own sector. And you mentioned about the health sector. How can we deliver healthcare much better? I believe we have a lot of listeners here who are health professionals. So how can we decarbonize the health sector? You know, improve our COVID response and recovery so that we don't do further harm to the environment. That's part of our Hippocratic Oath, by the way. And also, by the way, just a few weeks ago, I co-wrote a Lancet commentary about a new Hippocratic Oath for the era of planetary health. So I invite you to actually, you know, Google it, and this somehow speaks to what we're talking about. I want to bring in Antonella. So to that question of Ono, what can the health sector do? I'm pretty sure you have a knowledge of a lot of the innovations already popping out in this sector.
Yeah, there's a lot to do, and part of this, you were saying, if we were learning like fast enough. Like I think we're slow learners in many places yet, still. But in general, I think there's a lot happening, and we need more healthcare sectors and ministries of health, like doing their contribution to their NDC of each country, do your own sectoral plans. Countries are right now writing their long-term strategies for climate change. So what's the role of the healthcare sector there? Well, it's quite a big, there's a lot that we need to learn. Is like a lot of people doesn't know that healthcare is a quite interesting contributor to climate change, because it is an essential service and it's big. And we have seen, like in some cities, small cities in Latin America, at least what I was working, like before having a global position that I have right now, is like in some cities, like the biggest hospital, it's probably the largest polluter, because you are an intense research sector. So, and that's fine, we could say. Well, you need it, but you need to become a lot more efficient. And there's a lot that can show where we need to go. And that is slowly happening. And we have some very good news, like the NHS a few weeks ago published a document that you all should read, is that because they have set a goal to 2040 to become net zero. So how do you do that? And the answer is that there are some things that we don't know yet how we're going to do that. But there's a lot that we do know that we need to build differently. If you're going to build a new OR, a new hospital, you should have a strong energy efficiency, like standards. You need to start figuring out how to use a lot less plastics. Of course, you have to. You need to become a lot more efficient. You need to use the safer chemicals available to disinfect. And so there's a lot. And I think it's really important that while we stop climate change, we need to remember that it needs to be sustainable too. We don't want to create new problems in other regions of the world. So that's important. Like we are speaking in Canada today. So while you achieve a net zero healthcare system inside and Canada, be careful not to be creating new problems in other places of the world. So there's a lot happening. I think that the NHS has made like a very good step, and that's something that we should see replicated in other countries right now. Right now, Colombia is writing its sectoral plan for health, and it's going to have a mitigation component. And we should speak about that. And I'm having a call soon with Ethiopia because they want to track their carbon emissions. And it's good that everyone needs to do their part. That, you know, we all have a responsibility. Some countries have more and have more possibilities because poor countries right now in a very hard crisis. It's like how to go back, how to strengthen our healthcare systems after COVID. We need to strengthen all our healthcare system. How are we going to do that? Let's do it sustainable because it pays back. We all know it pays back in health, in environment, and economically too. So we have a lot of really nice things going on, really. And what healthcare systems see is that it pays back fast. If you build efficiently, if you start using renewables, it pays back. So I think it's like creating this kind of communities and learning from each other is very important. Like just not to start from scratch, because sometimes you are alone, like in X country, let's say Colombia, you want to do this and you're alone. So you have all this community around the world now, and you have Zoom and internet to learn and get inspired really. But we need systems. We need to jump right now. We need a big leap right now from hospitals doing great, from systems that need to do the same.
Thank you so much, Antonella. Powerful words, powerful examples. You know, and there's so much that can be done even within the hospital, you know, or a national health system like the NHS, which, as you've said, just announced this net zero goal, but also the global health sector at large. And, you know, I know that we have a big crowd here in this webinar. Maybe some people are actually working in global health organizations, UN agencies, global health consulting firms and nonprofits. And so all of these different actors in the global health sector certainly can contribute towards changing the environment for the better. But you also said about or touch upon the importance of working with other sectors. And I want to bring in Musonda because, you know, from the UN Environment's perspective, you deal with ministers of the environment and other, you know, actors in the environmental space. I think in the same way that I said that all professionals should be or are health professionals, I think every minister is a health minister. And so how can we actually, what are the actions now being done in the environmental policy realm at both national and global levels to address the challenges? And maybe how can we inject more health into these conversations as well? Because as you know, we started with the premise that the health of the people and the health of the environment are really deeply interconnected and inseparable. Musonda.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, it was really great to hear Ono and also Antonella talk about, you know, two landscapes that I love very much, because I'm doing some work also in Kyrgyzstan and Bhutan. And perhaps maybe I should begin by saying that, you know, what's very interesting and amazing is that in many parts of the world, the ministries of environment have been either the least funded, the least visible, and yet here we are talking about an environmental and health crisis. So really, and perhaps maybe let me also begin by saying that let's be realistic and really say that COVID-19 is in a way some kind of a test run for the planet and for humanity. How do we deal with a crisis that has such levels of intersectionality and different dynamics brought to the fore in a way that we've least anticipated? And so back to your question, Renzo, the issue of environment ministers who obviously come as member states to UN Environment. These ministers obviously have brought to the fore and have flagged, and for the first time within the UN history, we had the UN Biodiversity Summit on the margins of Unga. In fact, it was the last of the events on the 30th of September to really, and this is the first time that it ever happened, to talk about why, you know, the loss of biodiversity is also resulting in what we are now seeing with zoonosis and hence the situation with the pandemic. But I also want to say something from a health sector, which is why, environment are also connected to the health. Agriculture, for example, anywhere in part of the world, is also a sector that has, had implication of food systems, our problematic food systems, totally unsustainable, heavily polluted and everything, and in comes a pandemic. Now, what has that shown? What this pandemic has also brought to the fore is a conversation and a need to have cross-sector conversations around food systems, health. Doctors should not just be receiving sick people. We're now seeing why we need to eat a lot more healthier, why we need those micronutrients in our systems, even to just beat this pandemic. An unhealthy human is a more susceptible human being. An obese human is a more susceptible human being. So, and also I want to bring in the element of traditional knowledge systems and indigenous people knowledge systems. I think this is now an important topic and conversation to talk about within the health system and also within the food systems conversation. And I think, and I alluded to that, the needs for systems thinking and why we should be really thinking through this system. And also the gender dynamic. We begin to see that, mothers versus fathers in terms of what sort of, food systems and what sort of foods they're engaging with or conversations they're bringing to the table. All these dynamics really come at play. So back to environment ministers, and I think when we have the next UN Environment Assembly next year in 2021, obviously the conversation of the sustainability element of our planetary systems is something that's going to be at the fore. It will be, as I mentioned earlier on, the last decade of the SDGs. So how then do we begin to think about the layers and the intersectionality and also really putting the environment center stage as we converse on issues of circularity, like Antonella talked about plastic issues. In fact, plastic has more issues on our health, on our ecosystems, on our biodiversity, etc. How do we have a conversation about that? And similarly on climate change, the planetary emergency we're facing, and similarly elements of adaptation, which I think Ona really alluded to and are so important. If we don't adapt, we're doomed. And all of this really coming at the centrality and convergence of an environment. And I say it in closing, just as I sort of summarize, I say it at the very beginning that, what started as 2020 as a potential, super year for nature, as Inger had coined it and other colleagues within the UN sphere, in a way has turned out to be a super year for nature, to really put centrality of Earth on the table. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation here.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sonda. I also appreciate that you acknowledge the importance of communities, particularly indigenous communities, whose voices are usually being left out and forgotten. They're not represented in these policy discussions, and so we need to make sure that their wisdom are really respected and included and considered as we make these decisions. In fact, I heard that, for instance, I think it's a North American Native American Indian principle that when people make decisions, they think of not just their generation or the next generation after them, but the seventh generation. So it's called the seventh generation principle. And if the decision will have really huge negative impacts to the environment that will affect even the generations that are yet to be born, then probably that decision should be reconsidered, if not avoided. And so such wisdom is very important to be included in the conversation. You mentioned about environmental ministries usually, some of the most underfunded agencies. There's one comment from Janet Roberts that there are some projects, for instance, in the Philippines, a lot of intersectoral committees that brought together health and environment, supported by external, aid agencies. They did some exercise, collected data, but funding stopped and the program was never sustained. And I'm pretty sure we've heard this story, over and over again in many different settings. How can we put sustainability in sustainability work, right? Sustainability projects themselves are not sustainable how can we expect them to achieve the outcomes that they that they seek to achieve? So we have several questions, and I'm glad that our participants are actually, contributing to the conversation, asking really important questions. There's one question about the we're talking about uh, just a moment. Uh, for example, conferences and summits, also exert a huge carbon footprint. Although, now for the past several months, that has been reduced dramatically. And maybe there's another question about the post-COVID future. Uh, do we see that a lot of these perhaps low carbon, seemingly environmental sustainable activities like Zoom meetings such as this one will be sustained, will remain even after the pandemic is over, or at least once it's stabilized. And maybe you can give other examples of things that we're doing now because of COVID that seem to have some environmental benefits that we should actually be keeping as part of our post-COVID blueprint for the future. Anyone who would like to start?
Well,
Oh, no.
if I'm, yeah, I mean, this is really the topic, right? Because we're in a situation now where we all understand that things are not right. We're all talking, we're all Zooming and not jumping on airplanes. And many people can be motivated to say this is the time where we finally start to do something about the whole situation. But it's important to realize that's against the background where we messed up the planet. David Attenborough puts it beautifully in his recent film, In 200 Years, but we actually messed it up in his lifetime, and he's 94 years old. That's how quickly it happened. So I think the jury is very much still out. People always say it's the economy over anything else, and Bill Clinton was famous for that, and he's right in elections. So the question is, will people realize that short-term focus on the economy means suicide in the medium term? And I'm putting it in those terms, not to spook anybody, but because it's actually true. Musonda said, if we don't adapt, we're doomed. I'm not a doomsday person. I think we can do it. Our biggest challenge is to keep people focused on it and make sure it's not just the conversation of the ministers of environment, who I respect very highly, of course, but they can't do it on their own, because prime ministers listen to the minister of finance before they listen to the minister of environment. They listen to the minister of defense when there's an issue before the minister of the environment. So we need to realize truly that we need to tackle this issue and keep the momentum going. And I think our biggest thing is, how do you keep the momentum going if we find a vaccine and everybody kind of falls asleep again? It won't be 100 years till the next pandemic. I don't believe it for a moment. We do have time to act, but the time is really, really short. So I think conversations like these help a little bit. My biggest challenge is always, on this topic, we're better at talking to people who agree with each other than people who don't agree with each other. And that's a big challenge, because the people who don't believe in all this, they may be in a minority. Unfortunately, they're very powerful. So I think we can't give up. We really need to show some good examples. This is really important, because I think people who deny climate change deny it because they're scared of it, because they think you can't do anything about it. So they think, I'll just party and die, it's okay. The problem is, I've got a 3-year-old daughter. She can't say that. She has to have a future, right? And there's millions and millions like her who all need a future. So I think we need to work that narrative and keep talking and keep being positive about the fact that we can actually adapt. We can actually mitigate. Look at the price of solar energy. Who would have expected? Look at my country, the Netherlands. It couldn't have existed without human ingenuity, literally, because of sea level threat. There's so many things that can happen, but we lose focus every time. Europe got COVID under control and lost focus just because they went on summer holiday, and they forgot. that's humankind, right? So that's our challenge. And I don't know how to do it. I just really know that we need to find new forms of engagement that keep people focused on this in a positive way.
Thank you, Anna. We still have around 15 minutes, so we'll try to, bring in as many, ideas as possible, and as well as questions. And thanks, Anna, for, those statements. That's an advice and a suggestion to the organizer of the conference. Maybe in next year's conference, let's bring in the dissidents and the people that who usually don't agree with us, so that we can really have these difficult conversations and come up with, even bolder proposals. You also mentioned, and in a way you're saying, sure, let's make our conferences greener and low carbon, less travel, even beyond COVID times. But fundamentally, we need to talk about the economy. And sure, it's important to bring in health ministers and ministers of the environment, but we need the finance ministers, the economic planners to be in the table. I think we should also discuss, and maybe you have thoughts about how to transform the economy that is not just pandemic resistant, but also, climate resilient and smart and low carbon and really truly respectful of the planet. I saw Antonella raise her hand. Maybe she has comments to the earlier question, but you might have some thoughts about the economic transformation that is needed for the changing environment.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. That it reminded me that a few years ago, I started reading economics, really. Like, is this, as he said before, we need to convince the others. Like, we are convinced, people in the Ministry of Environment, they are all convinced. What we are not making the hard decisions is, like, for example, in my country, in the climate cabinet, you decide a few things, but you don't decide the subsidies to fossil fuels. That's decided in a very different room. So, and that happens probably everywhere. So we have very big challenge, and we need to talk with the others and to find some common language. I was reading, there are some climate reports that if you give those to an economist or to some public policies officers that are not trained in environment, they won't understand a thing, really. And I have been doing that. So that this is personally that I have started speaking with economists and trying to capture their own views in the response to COVID. Because we need to talk to each other. We are not understanding each other, really, in many cases. So we have some countries that are more advanced on this, but in others, we are really having trouble, as my colleagues here are saying, that to make the case. So I think there's a lot in our side to do, to work with the language and how to communicate with finance people and public policy officers that have nothing to do with environment. But of course, every ministry in every government needs to work on this if we're going to solve it, because environment and environmental health people, like we cannot solve it on our own. So I think there's a lot to be done, and I like that 7 generations things. I think Courtney Howard taught me that. And right. I think that, and this economic transformation, we need to make the case on what is the public health benefit on mitigating climate change, in solving so they can see the case. Because what I'm finding right now is that they keep saying, but we're in a crisis and we need to get out of it. And what you have by hand is doing just the same that you were doing before. So we need to create room for innovation and be creative and create new things, because that is the thing. We need to create new ways of producing, let's say, not probably wealth, but to thrive, or for people to be able to thrive everywhere. We need to change, because if not, we are just in a loop. So we are growing against, and we are creating a bigger problem in the end. Right. So this short-term, long-term thing, it's a real challenge, but I think we need to create room for being creative and to discuss, as you say, with others that don't think like us.
Thank you, Antonella, for those remarks, and really, economic transformation. We need to start really looking at these alternative proposals that exist. The top of mind for me right now is the donut economy model by Kate Rayworth, you know, an economy that protects the
Yeah.
planetary boundaries, but at the same time, meeting society's basic needs. Um, and I think that is starting to gain traction. The city of Amsterdam already adopted it as their post-coronavirus economic model. And we need to look into these, again, alternative proposals in preparation or to prepare ourselves for you know, post-COVID future. And post-COVID means the time when the vaccine is out, because SARS-CoV-2, the virus, will continue to circulate in the environment. Again, part of the changing environment, that these microbes, viruses, they will always be part of these ecosystems. And we as well, you know, humans will forever be its inhabitants, and we need the mind shift change. Musonda, you might have some insights as well about the economy, and you know, how can we actually, because you've been working in global governance institutions, interacting with all these UN agencies and governments, how can we start the conversation? How can we better communicate these bold ideas that Antonella was referring to, the importance of communication? I always think that the new economic model will not be invented in departments of economics, but in schools of public health or schools of planetary health and in the environment. Musonda, any thoughts on that?
Thank you. I mean, I have some thoughts on that, and I think, and I'll talk about it from a space of, restoration. For the first time within the UN system, we had the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration passed as a General Assembly resolution last year in March, on the 1st of March. And that for me is very telling, because part of our challenge is that our economic models have not worked. And as a result, they've also led to these high levels of degradation on this planet. And there's been implications, and this implication can be seen right now across the planet. So what does this decade mean? This is something that is bringing together, our agency, UN Environment, together with the Food and Agriculture Organization, and which is going to be launched in 2021, kind of officially. But the reality is that there's a lot of work happening around the issue of restoration. But more so, when you look at that resolution talks about conservation. If we conserve these ecosystems that are healthy and not destroy them and restore the ones that we've degraded, that in itself also feeds in within our economic thinking, and also feeds into the green recovery discussions that we're having right now. And it's a challenge for many organizations. It's a challenge for many governments to even think green, but never has there been a window of opportunity to rethink how we go forward as a planet. And be it private sector entities. Who was not affected by this pandemic? Shipping was affected, flights were affected, trading was affected. I mean, every facet of our very existence, because of a planetary dynamic. And that in itself is very telling of the centrality of how we need to focus on taking care of the environment.
Thank you, Musonda. And you mentioned that the disruptions that have occurred, and how we should be using this moment to really initiate these hard conversations. COVID-19 somehow opened a window of opportunity, but I think beyond looking at COVID as a disruption, I think we should look at this as an opportunity for reset, global reset. Resetting our economies, resetting our global and national and local governance systems. So we need to make sure all levels are being addressed, and every sector has its role as well in this healthy but also green and just recovery that we want. And we want it fast, and we want it to be inclusive and again respectful and fair. And so, we have a big agenda here. We might need a Marshall Plan for planetary health. And I guess I want to end this session by asking you, of course, your closing remarks, but also let's reflect on the leadership that is needed very much in these critical times. In the country adjacent to Canada, they will be having elections in 2 weeks' time. Democracy is under threat in many parts of the world. global governance is being questioned as well. There's a growing mistrust towards UN agencies, WHO, and other agencies as well. You know, COP26, climate conference supposed to be happening in November has been postponed for another year because of COVID. So where is the leadership for the changing environment in the era of the Anthropocene? So, you know, a while ago we mentioned anthropogenic, anthropocentric, and we live in the epoch of the Anthropocene, where humanity is really the major force shaping the face of the earth. So what kind of leadership? Where can we find that leadership? You know, is it from the likes of Greta Thunberg? Is it from, you know, national governments, from nonprofits, etc.? So where can we find the leadership for this transformation that we need? Anyone who would like to start? And this is your final remark. So
I personally think that the leadership comes from all corners. I mean, it comes from all ages, the Gretas, the Vanessas of this world, and, you know, all these young people who are so charged and telling the older generation to say so much damage has been done. But at the same time, you know, it comes from private sector entities, it comes from communities, those voices that matter, it comes from indigenous peoples. So, you know, we cannot necessarily be waiting for some political leadership. I think a lot of momentum has happened. We saw that in COP25 in Madrid, where a lot of young people came to the fore and just voiced their discontent and said something has to change. And we are the future. The future is here today. The future is not tomorrow. So everyone is a leader, really. Thank you.
excellent, Musonda. Ono?
Well, thanks for giving me the floor, because I want Antonella to end, and I'll explain why. So first of all, leadership needs to come from women, not from men. Men had their time, we failed. I want to be crystal clear about that. And it includes me. I've done my best, but the situation is what it is. The second thing is leadership needs to be younger. So not very hopeful for the country that you have a border with, because the candidates are a little on the old side. We really desperately need young people. Somebody asked on the Q&A, how do we get young people involved? I'm sorry, young people are far more involved in this than older people. Young people know that this is a problem. They know it's their future. Nobody needs to tell them. They just think their parents are stupid and messed up the world, not to speak of their grandparents. So that's where leadership needs to come from. And there are good examples in the world, thank God, of some young women who exercise excellent leadership. One of them was just re-elected in New Zealand. But it's not just about politicians. We really need to understand that we need to give youth space. We don't need to tell them what to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ono. And we'll give the final mic to Antonella.
Thanks a lot for that. And for telling me that I'm still young.
And woman.
I'm 37 now. So and a woman, yeah, that's what. So yeah, I think that, like closing remarks, really, where's the leadership coming from? Yeah, I admire really like the youth movement that is like thriving and asking for rights and to stop them. I think that that case is so strong that you really cannot look the other way. That has happened with some bills in my country where you're speaking about gender or other things that where these kids come and say, we cannot vote, but these are my rights. So I need you to listen. And I think that's really, really powerful. And they have, I think that the Gretas and others have raised the bar for all of us, that we were already working on this. They have an even harder work to do that we need. So I think that that's good. And that's leadership. I think that's, but the important thing is that you don't need to be a Greta. You can be a leader just in your community. And this for people listening, that you need to involve whenever you want, whatever you want, but get involved in social media, but outside in your community, just walking, talking, thinking. and participating, and because we need everyone to solve this. So I think that the leadership comes like from anyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Antonella. Thank you for your wonderful words. Thank you to Musonda, to Ono, Antonella, for all the wisdom that you have shared, not just with me, but with the rest of the attendees and those who are yet to watch the recorded version of this session. And in closing, I would just like to say, everyone is a leader. Everyone has an innate, leader lying inside your spirits and your souls and hearts. Now the COVID moment is asking you to unleash that energy of leadership, and let's be leaders in trying to, in not just protecting our own health, but protecting the changing environment in which we live in and thrive. So again, thank you very much, and please stay safe, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Wonderful
you.
conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.